We were told by the appellate court, I should say, the appellate court, what have you, the Court of Appeals, that NSA surveillance was kind of illegal, or at least the method of surveillance that was being taken by the NSA at the time, which was bulk metadata surveillance, which is kind of actually illegal. Well, the NSA has now pledged to eventually delete old bulk surveillance records. The National Security Agency will eventually delete the trove of millions of telephone records that it controversially amassed under the Patriot Act, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence announced on Monday. Destruction of the bulk surveillance records, which the NSA retained for a 5-year period, won't be immediate. But the ODNI said that it has determined that the NSA will not be allowed to maintain access to them, and their deletion would mark a victory for privacy advocates, although it's unclear exactly when that will begin. And that timeliness is actually kind of important because, well, I'd like to know when my info is going to be gotten rid of. Now, I'm not a very prominent figure, really, when it comes right down to it, right? I mean, I'm not some guy who everyone recognizes and I walk down the street and people say, hey, you're the guy from the radio. You know, I don't get that. And I'm fine with that, too. I don't really want that, honestly. So I'm not like a prominent figure that the NSA is going to be looking after because I'm so dangerous and all that sort of thing. Not yet, anyway. But it still is worrisome to me that my information has probably been seized by some federal agent at some point. That's a little bit worrying to me. Not because I'm a criminal or I'm some sort of anti-American protester or what have you, because I'm really not. I'm rather anti-establishment. Yeah, I don't like the state, the broader idea of a state. I'm not a fan of that idea. And there are certain arguments that I make that the federal government, I'm sure, would not be very happy about. But I'm not a violent person either. I don't believe in using violence as a form of political coercion. I don't believe in violence as a method for pushing a political point. At least I don't believe in using it. I'll put it that way, because I believe in voluntary societies, which aren't really favorable when it comes to violence. You know, it's voluntary, but I have to force you into it. It doesn't really correlate. So I'm a fan of a voluntary society much more than I'm a fan of a violence-driven society. Under the recently passed USA Freedom Act, the NSA will be banned from gathering and storing the records of Americans' telephone calls in bulk. Instead, those metadata records, such as the time a call was made, to whom it was made, and the duration of the call, will be held by the telephone companies, and the NSA will be required to submit specific search terms in order to request relevant data after obtaining a warrant from the secretive Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. Even though the Freedom Act, so-called, will end the bulk surveillance practice, it nonetheless permitted the NSA to continue gathering Americans' phone records for an additional 6 months after its enactment while the program is being phased out. So there's a bit of a grace period. That 6-month period will end on November the 29th, and the intelligence analysts will be barred from accessing the archive from that date, the ODNI has stated. Now, that doesn't mean that bulk metadata surveillance is going to come to an end. Far from it, actually. Instead, it just means that companies are going to have to do it instead of the NSA directly, so there's a middleman now. What happens now is the NSA has been barred from collecting bulk metadata itself. However, it can ask with a national security letter, or NSL, that a carrier hold on to that information, and then all the NSA has to do is grab that when they want it. So it's really not that hard, and it doesn't change a whole lot for the NSA, unfortunately. Now, yeah, there are going to be people who are going to defend that and say that, well, we need the NSA because of times we live in where there are Islamic extremists on every corner, and if you walk down the street, you might be blown up by an angry jihadi. It seems kind of unlikely, really. You know, there's not really any good argument for bulk metadata surveillance, especially from a constitutional perspective. There's really not any good argument for it. In fact, there's not really a good argument for a lot of things, but it's just frustrating when people think that we have to continue with something simply because it's been that way for a long time. You know, like we've had the Patriot Act in one form or another since 2001, roughly. And there have been other wiretapping acts and such before that. In the 50s, we had wiretapping, and forward during the Red Scare, it was a big thing. So really, surveillance is not anything new. It's just adapting with the times. And unfortunately, we keep being stuck with it, and we get the short end of the stick, really, when it comes to the protection thing, because for some reason, to protect us, we have to be horribly oppressed, and we have to also bow to the whim of every governmental decision. That seems kind of, well, un-American, I would suppose. It sounds kind of wrong. And it has nothing to do with parties. That's something that has to be understood outright. This has nothing to do with parties. The Republican Party does exactly the same thing as the Democratic Party when it comes to surveillance. There are very few differences between the two parties. I think about it this way. We've had prominent Republicans calling for expansion of these different metadata programs. We've had a lot of different Republicans calling for expansion. We've had some Democrats calling for expansion. Now, to be fair, we've had people from both parties calling for a reduction of the bulk metadata surveillance which the NSA performs. But still, it kind of just goes to show that party lines don't really matter on a lot of issues. And it really seems to be more of a controlled opposition than anything. And notice how a lot of these different bills will pass by sometimes just a hair. And it's almost as if they've coordinated to ensure that it appears that there's a opposition. How strange. And it's really, parties don't really matter when it comes right down to that sort of thing. And really, when it comes right down to it in general, parties are not particularly useful to any sort of political change. For some reason, people think that change and solutions are born out of the ballot box, when really that's usually not the case. It doesn't seem to me that we can vote out the NSA, because you can't. What are you going to do to get rid of the NSA? Well, if we vote for the right guy, then no, it doesn't work that way. I mean, the right guy then has to go through the right committee, who then has to put up a vote before Congress and all these sorts of things. And it just keeps going and going. And really, it doesn't matter who's president. We're still going to have these things. Executive order number whatever isn't going to change anything. There's still going to be some national security agency of some sort that's going to be taking all of our information in, because it's incredibly useful. It's incredibly profitable. And there are a lot of different contractors which benefit from it. So really, why would we stop is really the question, is because there's no answer other than just there's no reason to stop. Really, there is none from their perspective. We have to continue because it's extremely profitable, and it gains us some sort of semblance of control over the market, over the populace, if you will, over the serfs beneath us. Number to call in is 423-800-8949. That's 423-800-8949. If you want to call in here on Hot News Talk Radio, AM 1240. Hot News Talk Radio is everywhere. Listen live to Hot News Talk Radio at hotnewstalkradio.com. Download the TuneIn Radio app and search for Hot News Talk Radio. Hot News Talk Radio is also on Twitter, where you report the world decides. That's AM 1240 Hot News Talk Radio. Again, 423-800-8949 if you want to call in. No, it's not a 1-800 toll-free number. It's just 423-423-800-8949 if you want to call in. Well, the records already compiled about the NSA will not be going anywhere right away. Rather, the records already compiled about us, I should say. Technical personnel will be allowed to access the records solely for data integrity purposes to verify the records produced for an additional 3 months after access to analysts has been banned. Even after these 3 months are over, the data is unlikely to be destroyed immediately. The ODNI said that the NSA is under legal obligation to keep the archive intact while the agency is being sued over the bulk surveillance program by groups such as the Electronic Frontier Foundation and the ACLU. Once those lawsuits are dealt with, or once the courts rule that the NSA does not have to keep the archive any longer, the data will be deleted ASAP, according to them. Still, though, it seems rather unlikely that such a treasure trove would be gotten rid of. It sounds a little bit, well, unlikely. Something that has to be considered, too, is think about how Edward Snowden came out with these revelations about the NSA. Of course, that's former NSA contractor Edward Snowden, whom I'm referring to, came out with these different revelations about the NSA. But had he not, everything would have continued as normal. In fact, really, things are continuing as normal anyway. But had he not done that, then really nothing would have changed. We wouldn't know that this was going on, and everything would continue as normal. And it would just be, we'd be stuck in this situation where we sort of think possibly that we're being spied on, but we don't really know the extent of it. And it would be delegated over to crazy conspiracy theorists and tinfoil hat sporting guys to talk about these sorts of things, and that would be it. But now we know what's going on, and the government is very upset, understandably, because now the illusion has been broken that the government always works in our favor. You know, that illusion has been broken because it was never true anyway. Why would a state ever actually work in the favor of the people when it's so much more profitable and so much easier to work against the interests of the people while profiting for yourself? It's pretty obvious, actually. So that's why I'm very much against the state when it comes down to surveillance. I'm very much against the idea of what some call the deep state or the good people. I'm definitely not a fan. This is Hot News Talk Radio, AM 1240. We are everywhere. Listen live to Hot News Talk Radio at hotnewstalkradio.com. Download the TuneIn Radio app so you can listen on your smartphone and search for Hot News Talk Radio, and we'll pop right up. Hot News Talk Radio is also on Twitter, where you report the world decides. That's AM 1240 Hot News Talk Radio. The NSA is supposedly going to be losing access to its bulk metadata collection phone record database on November the 29th. And The Verge has a story about that as well, saying that the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, or ODNI, has laid out a roadmap for restricting access to and eventually deleting years' worth of telephone records collected under the Patriot Act. In a statement released today, the office addressed questions about how intelligence agencies are going to be transitioning into the new reform surveillance framework, which was, signed into law last month. While the USA Freedom Act bans what's known as bulk collection of phone metadata, the NSA was given a 6-month grace period to phase that out. Oh boy, 6 months is a long time, by the way. So it's not really, it's not like this is going to take place immediately, right? Ex post facto. No, it's going to take place over the course of 6 months. Now, 6 months, of course, in the computer world is a really dang long time, and 6 months gives you time to move information, create new databases, create new supercomputer clusters if you want to. The government has essentially endless resources anyway, so it's not like there's any shortage of things that can be done within 6 months. While the USA Freedom Act bans what's known as bulk collection of phone metadata, the NSA was given this 6-month grace period. But the ODNI promises that November the 29th will mark the beginning of the end for the database. On November the 29th, the ODNI says that intelligence analysts will lose access to post data. In theory, this means that they would no longer be able to search the records as part of the anti-terrorism or national security investigations, a practice that has arguably been less than useful in foiling plots. They'll be able to make more limited requests from phone companies under the new rules. Now, that's not quite the end, though. For 3 months after that, technical personnel, as in quotes, will be allowed to check the data, not for investigations, but for data integrity purposes to verify the records produced under the new USA Freedom Act rules. And for an undefined period of time after that, yes, it goes further, the data will be preserved as evidence in lawsuits against the NSA, which have been filed by organizations such as, of course, the Electronic Frontier Foundation and the American Civil Liberties Union. American Civil Liberties Union. That's a tongue twister, right? The NSA's phone record collection was, of course, found to be illegal by a federal appeals court earlier this year, and it's not a surprise that the agency will eventually destroy the records, but this announcement remains another concrete step towards changing the program. But think about this. It's been deemed to be illegal by a federal appeals court. So why aren't people being arrested, right? I mean, it's still going on, so why aren't people being arrested for continuing these practices? That sounds kind of, well, hypocritical, really. If I was told that something I was doing was illegal, I wouldn't say, well, give me 6 months and I'll quit. No, if you have to stop immediately, because that's just how it is, right? I mean, that's how it would be for any regular citizen, I should say. Why isn't James Comey being arrested for conspiracy to treason or something along these lines? You know, why aren't these different people being arrested? Why isn't the director of the NSA being arrested for violation of federal law now at this point? Because it's been deemed that it's illegal. NSA bulk metadata phone collection is illegal. So why then is no one being arrested? Why is no one being accounted for? Well, there's a good reason, actually. Someone would have to file a warrant. Who's going to do that? Somebody would have to file a complaint. Who's going to do that? Somebody would then have to carry out that warrant/complaint. Who's going to do that? I mean, think about it. Somebody has to raise some sort of legal complaint. In this case, I would assume it would be the Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, at this point, who I very much doubt is going to raise any sort of complaint. And then someone would have to go and carry out that complaint or that warrant, in this case, an arrest warrant for, say, the director of the NSA. And then he'd have to be arrested. There'd have to be a trial during which he'd probably be found not guilty or given house arrest for 6 months or something silly like that. And he'd just have to wear an ankle bracelet around his luxurious house in Malibu, right? I mean, it wouldn't make any difference anyway. That's the annoying thing. People put so much faith in the system that they think that it's going to make a difference if we sue somebody or if we arrest somebody or if we just make one thing illegal or whatever, when really it doesn't matter. People are unfortunately duped into thinking that the system that we have today in terms of law and order and in terms of legality and in terms of legislation and regulation and Congress and Senate and Supreme Court and all these different things, people have been duped into thinking that it works when in actuality it doesn't. It did, but it doesn't really now. That's the thing. Things have changed quite a bit since 1798, believe it or not. And that being the case, things are not exactly sustainable at this point. It's been so corrupted by years and years of legislation, by years and years of litigation, years and years of cronyism, that at this point, it's not even the same thing. It's not even the same animal as it was before. It's really a caricature of what we had. It's an exaggeration of what we had. Think about it this way. There was no such thing as a police force back in the 1700s. People fended for themselves. Now, yeah, there was a sheriff, but that was it. Law enforcement was really just citizens arresting people under citizens arrest, sheriffs carrying out the law, militias, and that was it. That was law enforcement. The Supreme Court was really only there to settle disputes between states. All these different things that's just how it was. But now everything's become so twisted. Definitions have even changed. I mean, think about it this way. What is a dollar? You don't know what a dollar. I didn't know what a dollar was until just recently. A dollar is actually a unit of measurement. A certain amount of gold is a dollar. That's what a dollar is. But now we call any sort of currency a such and such dollar. Well, this piece of paper is a Canadian dollar. Well, no, it's not. It's not a Canadian measurement of gold. No, it's a banknote. Kind of. It's really a promise to repay debt that can never be repaid. So it's really just worthless. It's polymer. Which Canadian money is, by the way. It's polymer at this point. For the viewer, actually on YouTube, I can hold up a Canadian $20 bill that I've had for a while. It actually is polymer. You can't tear the thing, and it's really cool. It's a Canadian $20 banknote. Why I have a Canadian $20 banknote? Well, I went to Canada once. That's why. Canada's a cool country. I need to go back. So yeah, Canada has polymer money, and we have denim money. Money here in the United States, the paper money is actually made out of denim from recycled jeans, actually. In fact, fun bit of trivia to get off track a little bit. There was almost a crisis of supply when skinny jeans became popular because waist denim wasn't really there. We weren't using nearly as much denim, so there wasn't nearly as much waste. And the waste denim is given to the Treasury Department to then be turned into paper money, which isn't actually paper. It's actually made out of cotton. It's denim. So there was actually a crisis because skinny jeans became very popular that the dollar almost went extinct, or at least came into a bit of a supply crisis with dollars. But really, do we really need that much more of them anyway? I mean, they're not worth a whole lot, so why bother having them? In fact, rarity of supply might actually drive the value up, so maybe that's a good thing anyway. Go figure. Well, anyway, this is Digital Drive. I'm your host, Russell. We're talking about technology and quite a bit more, and for some reason, supply of dollars based on the jeans industry. This is AM 1240 Hot News Talk Radio. We are everywhere. The time right now is 12:24. 93 is the high for today. Oh boy. There's about a 50% chance of rain today as well, and we're expecting that to continue on into the rest of the week. Unfortunately, we're seeing rainy forecasts here for the rest of the week, at least up until Thursday. Today, 95 is actually the high. It just got updated. 30% chance of storms. Wednesday, 91 is a high, 30% chance of storms. Thursday, 90 is a high, 40% chance of storms. So we're going to be seeing a rainy 3 days here. Friday and Saturday, look actually quite good. Sunny and in the 80s. High 80s, of course, but still not that bad. So right now the time is 12:25, and the temperature is roughly in the mid 80s right about now, and the humidity is unfortunately quite present. This is Hot News Talk Radio AM 1240. 950 Android phones can be hijacked by malicious text messages. The number to call in is 423-800-8949. Almost all Android mobile devices available today, according to Ars Technica anyway, are susceptible to hacks that can execute malicious code when they are sent a malformed text message or the user is lured to a malicious website, a security researcher reported on Monday. The vulnerability affects about 950 million Android phones and tablets, according to Joshua Drake, who's vice president of platform research and exploitation at security forum Zimperium. It resides in Stage Fright, which is an Android code library that processes several widely used media formats. The most serious exploit scenario is the use of a specially modified text message using the multimedia message format, or MMS. So if you've ever received an MMS, generally speaking, it's an audio file, a video file, or an image. Images are most common, of course, but all an attacker needs is the phone number of the vulnerable Android phone, and that's it. From there, the malicious message will surreptitiously execute malicious code on the vulnerable device with no action required by the end user and no indication that anything is amiss. So all you have to do to trigger this is to send a text message, and that's it. Actually, a multimedia message, but still, that's all you have to do is send an MMS to somebody, and you could potentially screw up their phone. That's pretty scary. This is Digital Drive here on Hot News Talk Radio, AM 1240.
This is a mob mode. This is the mob mode. What kind of fool do you think I am? You think I know nothing about
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240. Hi, this is your computer speaking. I don't feel so well. It's like I've come down with a bug, and I'm getting slower.
Affordable Computers. We fix sick computers. Your hometown guys at Affordable Computers will repair your PC in half the time of the big boys at an affordable price. No tricks, no gimmicks, no computer speak technobabble. Just good, quick, and courteous affordable service and repairs. Want to affordably supercharge your PC? Affordable Computers on Highway 58. Affordable Computers hand builds all desktops in-house. If you're looking for a better-than-new refurb laptop, $150 will get you a Dell or another name brand at Affordable Computers. Affordable Computers, Highway 58, between Arby's and Taco Bell. Also Fort O, Battlefield Parkway near Holcomb's. Affordable Computers, we service what we sell. Call 499-1975. That's 499-1975.
Wow, this is amazing. I'm feeling great. Supercharged.
We've got a table here at Delia's in Saudi Daisy, ready to delight in a plate of authentic Mexican food. Delia's spreads a rich selection, loaded nachos, crazy chicken, homemade tamales, maybe the enchiladas with beef, chicken, pork, quesadillas. Every dish beautifully pictured on the menu to help us decide. Join us for lunch or dinner. We're at Delia's in Saudi Daisy on Dayton Pike near the Thrasher Light. Here's dinner. Delia's uses the freshest ingredients, cooked to perfection. Nachos, homemade. Delia's open every day except the Lord's Day. For lunch and dinner, treat yourself to Delia's genuine Mexican food. In Saudi, call 521-7145. That's 521-7145.
Do you feel better outside your home or business than in? Indoor air quality is important. Mildew, mold, smoke, water, and rodent damage are prime causes of poor indoor air quality. Ducts, Indoor Air Professionals, better known as Duct Busters, cleans HVAC systems using 127 definable Duct Busters steps. Let Mark Thompson address the indoor air quality at your business to help reduce employee illnesses. Prevent fires by cleaning your dryer vents. Mark and his parents, Dick and Joan Thompson, have been building our local economy and helping local people with HVAC systems 16 years. Ducts, Indoor Air Professionals. Call 876-9907. 876-9907. Ducks. Call now.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240.
You love your hometown. Are you interested in free markets, in local economy? Do you hope that Chattanooga can survive the next meltdown, the next chain of disasters in the national economy? What's the best way to live out the ideals of self-government and self-determination? Join me, David Toulis, weekdays 1 to 3.
Hot News Talk 1240.
Love your neighbor, buy local.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
Hot News Talk 1240.
Fox News Radio, I'm Gary Baumgarten. A New York State prison worker pleads guilty to helping two killers escape.
There are reports that Mitchell had sexual relationships with one or both of the men and eventually began smuggling them tools, including hacksaw blades, chisels, a punch, and screwdriver bits inside pieces of cardboard and raw hamburger meat.
Fox's Rick Leventhal says Joyce Miller faces up to 7 years in prison. On Capitol Hill, Secretary of State John Kerry defending the Iran deal.
If this deal is rejected, we immediately go back to the reality I just described without any viable alternative, except that the unified diplomatic support that produced this agreement will disappear overnight.
Republican California Congressman Ed Royce countering Iran cannot be trusted. President Obama wrapped up his 2 African nation tour with an address to the African summit in Ethiopia. Fox News, we report, you decide.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240.
Uber, for some reason, is making people really upset, and I don't really know why. Well, okay, I do know why, but I don't know why, if that makes any sense. This is Digital Drive. I'm your host, Russell. We're talking about technology and quite a bit more. I'm also the news director here at Hot News Talk Radio, a very prestigious office that I hold here at Hot News Talk Radio. I'm the news director. I'm also sort of kind of producer and sort of kind of general manager sometimes when nobody else is here. So I wear a lot of hats here at Hot News Talk Radio. The reason I bring that up, and it's not to brag because it's cool, but it's not like I'm the president or anything, you know? It's really awesome, and I wouldn't want any other job, but you know, people talk all the time about, oh, you work in radio, it must be so cool. And it's like, oh, yeah, it is. But, you know, after a while, I mean, it's a job, you know, it's great. I have fun every day, but it's, you know, it's a job. Eventually, the fact that you're on the air sort of wears off, and it's fun every single time, but you sort of stop thinking about how cool it is that you're on the radio. And it just sort of hit me today that it's just really cool to talk on the radio. There's just something really neat about that. It's a unique opportunity to be able to talk to someone over the airwaves. I mean, how weird is that I'm talking to you over these airwaves or over the internet, and we're having a conversation, albeit a rather one-sided one, over this weird method of communications that was invented back in the 1800s. You know, how strange is that? Well, this is Digital Drive. I'm your host, Russell, and I do appreciate you joining me here at Hot News Talk Radio. You can call in at 423-800-8949. That's 423-800-8949. Especially if you are upset about Uber, I'd be certainly interested to hear why, because I don't really understand a lot of the complaints. Now, the mayor of New York, Bill de Blasio, or as some hosts on Hot News Talk Radio like to call him, I should say, Comrade de Blasio, which is, I think, and now this is a very clever jab, and it might be one that I'm not understanding, but I think is meant to imply that he's a communist. And I think that's what they're going for with that one. But it's a very thickly veiled jab, and I'm not sure if I understand it. So I'll have to take that with a bit of a grain of salt. I think it's meant to imply that Bill de Blasio, the mayor of New York, is a communist, although I'm not quite sure. Well, as it is now, Uber has reached a deal with New York Mayor Bill de Blasio, and that's according to CNBC. After a weeks-long battle between ride-hailing companies and New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio, an agreement between Uber and the city has been reached to not cap for-hire vehicle company growth in New York while a study on FHV impact in the municipality is conducted, which sounds like they're doing a study on some sort of horrible communicable disease. We're doing a study on the impact of FHV here in New York City. There's been an outbreak of FHV, which I'm pretty sure is vehicle for hire, I think, although they have it a bit mixed up. So it is actually for hire vehicles, which is stupid and is harder to say than VFH, but whatever. This comes after San Francisco-based Uber aired TV ads that feature drivers sharing how the cap could impact their livelihood. The company also added a Bill de Blasio, or rather just de Blasio feature to the Uber app, which displayed that fewer available cars and longer wait times would likely be under the proposed growth limits. And Mayor de Blasio's administration apparently and the city council have collaborated on a joint transportation study, according to Uber, to work together on ways to continue expanding economic opportunity, mobility, and transportation access in the city. That's according to, that's according to Uber's general manager for New York City, Josh Moore. That's what he said in an agreement. The proposal that has been tabled would have temporarily capped the growth of Uber and other for-hire vehicles in New York City through April of 2016, I should say. Instead, a bill is expected to be voted on Thursday that would authorize a study on how FHVs have impacted traffic, air quality, noise, and public health. As part of the agreement, Uber will provide data for the study. Now, a lot of these arguments which have been proposed by the mayor of New York have an odd sort of understanding. And that odd understanding is that the city government somehow has some say in business. And that's a very flawed understanding of the role of government. Now, to be fair, different states are different. Like, okay, for instance, Louisiana does not have counties, it has parishes, right? I mean, Louisiana is under a Napoleonic law instead of common law in a lot of ways. The laws in Louisiana are based on a different set of laws than the laws in a lot of different states. So that's one example that you could use. Philadelphia does not, or rather New Jersey, I believe, does not really have any sort of constitutional amendment about the right to bear arms. There are lots of different states that have lots of different amendments to its individual constitution, and that's okay. And that actually is okay. States should have these different amendments. States should have different powers from each other. That's okay. After all, that sort of brings a uniqueness to each municipality that's really, again, kind of okay. I mean, individuality in a municipality is definitely a great thing, and it's an interesting thing, and it leads to an interesting life experience when living in that particular city. Unfortunately, New York has very negative, unique qualities to it. One of which, although this isn't quite unique, is that the different people in power in New York City, for some odd reason, think that they can control commerce, or at least they think they have a right to control commerce. Now, something that has to be understood about government is that government is not meant to have rights. Government is meant to have power, right? Different powers, allowed powers, denied powers, what have you. And really, that's about it. Government is not meant to have as big a role as it has now here in the United States that we know today. This was never really meant to happen. In fact, we were supposed to do something before this happened, but it's kind of too late for that now. Anyway, it's unfortunate that we are in the situation that we have today, but unfortunately, Mayor de Blasio and his ilk have a odd understanding about how economy works, and they seem to believe that intervention is the best policy, whereas I, and probably you, have a different idea, which is that intervention is actually the death of innovation, and intervention is really not a good idea when it comes to the government. Now, there might be very, very few examples, like, for instance, if there are illegal practices going on, well, okay, we can understand that. But the problem does not begin with Uber. That's something that has to be understood. The problem that so many people see with Uber does not begin and end with Uber. Uber is simply a convenient way to show the problem. The problem is this. Licensure, in a lot of different ways, causes so many different regulatory problems, and plus it costs money. Right? Think about it this way. In New York City, it's extremely expensive to run a taxi company because the different taxi commissions and different taxi lobbyists and taxi unions as well have lobbied to make the price of a chauffeur's license very expensive, and the license to run a taxi company very expensive. I mean, very expensive. We're talking hundreds, thousands of dollars in New York City to run a taxi company. That's why there's really only one. There's a yellow cab, and that's about it, actually, in New York City. Why isn't there more competition? Well, because yellow cab has very good lobbyists, or whichever taxi company in question has very good lobbyists, and so you have government control. Too much government control, you might say. In fact, any government control over commerce, I would argue, is too much. Now, people are going to be very angry at that statement because people, especially in this day and age, have it ingrained into their heads, and I did too as a young lad, that we need some sort of intervention in order to prevent total chaos. Now, they'll say anarchy, I say chaos, because the two are not synonymous. Anarchy simply means lack of rulers. That's really what it is. An, coming from Latin meaning lack of, and archy meaning ruler, sort of like a monarchy, right? It's one ruler. It's a mono, one, archy, ruler. One ruler, monarchy. Anarchy is no ruler. An, none. Archy, ruler. No ruler. It's actually very simple, but that does not equate to chaos. A lot of people who will fly the banner of anarchy, which is actually kind of redundant anyway, because why would you have symbolism in a movement that is against rulers anyway? They'll fly the banner of anarchy, and they'll be hooligans and ruffians and vandals and what have you, simply to use a political cause as an excuse to cause trouble. But that's really not how it works. At least that's not how a true form of anarchy would work, because it would be ideally, I should say, non-aggressive. And that's something that has to be understood. Non-aggression is the chief principle upon which most anarchy-based ideologies are based, and that's something that has to be understood. Politicians who are afraid of a lack of ruler are going to tell you that anarchy means chaos, when in actuality that's not necessarily true, and that's mostly just pro-state propaganda when it comes right down to it. And I'm not anti-commerce either. People have this odd idea as well that people who are anarchists are against some sort of voluntary exchange between two or more persons in order to create a company or corporation or trust or LLC or what have you, when really I'm not against that at all. And I would classify myself in a lot of ways anyway as an anarchist, although not completely, because I might be more accurately classified, I should say, as a minarchist, meaning that I think there probably should be a court system, because that would be the one exception. There probably should be a court system, and possibly a fire department, although volunteer fire departments exist, and that's about it, really. And I don't think that there should be police either. Now, sheriffs are a whole other matter because it's a common law thing, but when it comes down to a police force, no. Private police forces would be a terrible idea. You can hire a private security company, of course, and you can form a private security company if you so choose, but arresting powers would not go beyond that of the citizen. So anyway, that's a whole nother concept for a whole nother day. We can talk about minarchy versus anarchy, and we can talk about all sorts of different semantics when it comes down to it. But the main principle that we can all pretty much agree on is that aggression is not good and coercion is not good. And really, all of these different programs that we have with taxation, with benefits, and all these sorts of things have to be based upon aggression, which I view as immoral. Anytime you hear about any program that is going to bring books for kids, it's always backed by aggression. Now, that's not to say that giving books to kids is a bad thing, right? Just as an example, because certainly children should read books. Children should have books read to them. That's good. That should happen. However, it's not the state's responsibility to ensure that that does happen. And the state, of course, has to be backed by force in order to collect money. Money is collected through taxes. How do you ensure that people pay taxes? There's that thinly veiled threat of violence or coercion in some other way through financial harm that is behind the taxation system. Thus, that is also immoral. Every single benefit that we have, any sort of social benefit that exists, must be backed by violence. So you cannot be pacifist and also pro, say, a national healthcare system. You really can't be. You can think that you are, but you really can't be, because in principle, it doesn't work that way. It's interesting because it's a very complex thing. When it comes down to it, it's very complex, and there are a lot of different facets to it. But the main thing that must be understood is anytime we're talking about any sort of benefits program, it must be backed by force. And you can either be fine with that, or you can be against that. And that's what it comes down to. And those are two different schools of thought. And again, that's okay, because as someone who is a very big proponent for free thought, I think that it's fine if you think that. You see, I'm totally fine with you being communist, or you being national socialist, or you being whatever you want to be, because you can do that and you can think however you want. You can lobby however you'd like, and you can protest however you'd like as well, so long as you're not being aggressive against somebody else or causing physical aggression against somebody else, then we're okay. Right? Initiation of force against another human being is wrong. We can all pretty much agree on that, right? Like if I come up to you or come up to somebody else and punch them in the head, you probably agree that that's not good. And I punch them in the head and I take their money and run off, you probably agree that that's not good, and that's actually robbery and assault and battery possibly as well if I insult them in some way whilst doing so. But somehow when it's done by a entity that we've all voted into existence, it's suddenly okay. And I'm not sure I understand why that is. We can all agree that if an individual does something, it's wrong, but for some reason we can't agree that if an institution does something, it's wrong. Why can't we agree on that? I'm not sure why. Why is robbery okay if it's done by an institution, but it's suddenly wrong and vile if it's done by an individual? And that might even sound like an argument for robbery. And it would be if I were a statist, but I'm not. So that's the basic idea, the basic principle behind these arguments against Uber is that people wish for coercion against Uber, that the people who work for Uber should have to do something other than just run a business. They have to do something other than be business people. Somehow people have this idea that, well, it's not fair, they're not paying this tax or that tax. Well, no, it's not fair that anyone is paying this tax or that tax. It just happens to be very convenient that the folks at Uber have figured out a way to get around it. They figured out a way to not get robbed, and that's fine. That's cool. People should find out ways to not get robbed, and Uber should be used as an example instead of being vilified by those who are supposedly for small business. Well, New York City is a major market for app-based ride-hailing companies, according to CNBC, but the city is under pressure from the Taxi and Limousine Commission, or the TLC, as taxi medallions have lost some 20% of their value since 2011. But is that a bad thing, really? Think about it this way. Commerce is a very fluid thing. Businesses are very fluid things. There's always a different flow when it comes down to business. There's always something changing in the marketplace. The marketplace is a forever evolving thing. But one thing remains constant. There is failure and there is success. Those are the two constant things. You see massive failure and you see massive success, and sometimes there's just no way to predict that. But if a company starts to fail, what is the government to come in and say that this should not be? Who is the voter to come in and say that this should not be? Think about GM. And actually go farther back than that. Think about the 80s when there was the embargo against Japanese car manufacturers because Reagan and his ilk thought that it was a terrible thing that foreign companies were doing better than American companies, so they controlled the marketplace in order to stop that from happening. That really isn't a free market system. Either you believe in a free market system or you believe in controlled economy, you believe in controlled capitalism. It's one or the other. And again, it's fine if you say you're for controlled capitalism, but don't say you're for a free market if you're also for intervention, because you can't be both. And that's where people get very confused, I think, is people will say, oh, I'm very free market, but I also want there to be controls on such and such and such. There can't be any but there. I'm very free market, but it's like saying I'm forced free speech, but no, it doesn't work that way. Or I'm pro Second Amendment, however, it doesn't quite work that way. And this is a basic principle this is where we differ. Right? This is where people like you or I differ from people such as Bill de Blasio in New York City. And again, it's fine that he thinks that way. And certainly Bill de Blasio has a right to believe in the principles which he believes in. I'm not going to argue against that. Certainly he has a right to that. But people should call it as it is. Bill de Blasio is certainly for a controlled economy, and he's not pro-free market. There's no way that he could be. The number to call in is 423-800-8949. That's 423-800-8949 here at Hot News Talk Radio. The temperature is rather warm outside, and we're expecting about a 30% chance of storms. It was looking a little bit gloomy out here at the studios, but it's suddenly actually gotten a little bit sunnier, so go figure. The weather is such an odd thing, though, especially in the Chattanooga area, because we have so many mountains where on one side of the mountain it'll be just pouring down and there'll be tornadoes, and then downtown on the other side of the mountain everything will be fine. So Chattanooga is a very odd area when it comes down to weather, especially I live in Georgia over in Ringgold, and I can tell you that I'll be up here at the office and I'll call home and be like, hey, how's it going down there? And they'll say, oh, we just had the worst storms ever, and nothing happened up here. So that sort of thing happens a lot. The temperature right now is about 86 degrees, very pleasant outside actually. The high for today is 95, 30% chance of storms. Wednesday, 91 and 30% chance of storms, and Thursday 90 degrees with a 40% chance of storms. So you have to call it like it is. Bill de Blasio is in favor of a free market or he's not. And in this case, he's not. And again, that's okay. People voted him in understanding that, I should hope, but that's just how it is. As context, there are roughly, according to CNBC, 13,500 yellow taxis on the road in New York City, a capped number. A capped number? And 63,000 for-hire vehicles, according to the TLC. In other words, there are roughly 4 or more for-hire cars for every cab in New York City, thus causing quite a bit of trouble for the yellow cab companies or what have you. So New York City Council Speaker Melissa Viverito said in the statement, we look forward to a real partnership with the for-hire vehicle industry, along with genuine data sharing that will give us a better picture of their impact on our streets, says New York City Council Speaker Melissa Viverito. Lyft, which is another taxi company, well, ride-sharing company similar to Uber cheered the agreement, as the company was also lobbying against an FHV cap in New York. Again, FHV is for hire vehicle. It should be VFH, but that would be too streamlined, and we can't have that because it's government. This is good news for consumers and drivers, and we thank the City Council for listening to our concerns about removing carpooling options, which we see as part of the solution to traffic congestion. We will continue working together with the City Council and the TLC to build a more sustainable future for New York. This is David Mack, who's Lyft's Director of Public Affairs, in a statement. Now, the main problem with this is, notice they mentioned the whole cap thing. They mentioned that this is a capped number. Again, it says, as context, there are roughly 13,500 yellow taxis on the road in the city, which is a capped number, and 63,000 for hire vehicles, according to the TLC. Now, the reason for that, and the TLC, by the way, is the Taxi and Limousine Commission, or TLC, and they put out the taxi medallions, which have apparently lost 20% of their value since 2011, which is when Uber started to come on the scene. But think about it this way. Why is there a cap? Well, oversaturation is what the city government is concerned about, I'm sure. Oversaturation. If it's not capped at 13,000 or however many, then there will be a yellow cab everywhere, and there will be oversaturation, and people will be running into yellow cabs, and we'll have huge congestion problems and what have you. It's a logistics problem. It's a city planning problem, is the view of the people in New York City, I'm sure. However, who is the government to make this, or what is the government, I should say, to make this decision? Who is Bill de Blasio to say that these are too many cabs, or these are too few cabs, or there should only be this set amount? If there was a problem with oversaturation, there'd be a problem with overhiring in the yellow cab company, and they'd have to lay people off, and there wouldn't be enough people to supply the cabs with fares, and so the market would say that there need to be fewer cabs, and that would be it. Now, there are 13,000 some odd Uber cars in New York City, and that seems to be fine, because for hire vehicles are not for hire all the time. It's people who are doing this on their off time in the Uber program. You're not a full-time Uber driver when you're an Uber driver. It's a side thing. It's a passive thing that you do sometimes if you're in the area. So yeah, it's 13,000 sounds like a lot, but these people are not active all the time. And why isn't it up to Yellow Cab Company to decide if these taxis are enough or not, if there are too many taxis or not? Why isn't that up to the company itself? That's like if there's a commission on vending machines which determined that there can only be 200 Coca-Cola vending machines in the city of Chattanooga. That makes no sense at all. Why would there be control on that? If one is not profitable, they remove it. You know, and even so, it's usually contracted out by the small business anyway, but still, it makes no sense. That's just nonsensical. And the same goes for yellow cabs. You know, why should the government say anything at all about how many cabs there are, and why it's okay that there are this many cabs, but not okay that there are that many cabs? It doesn't make any sense. It's nonsensical. It's just an attempt to control the economy, to control commerce, because for some odd reason, people think that that's what must be done. And the tech sector is fighting against that. That's where the digital part comes in. The tech sector is very much fighting against both federal, state, and local, be it community or be it municipalities interfering with commerce. The digital economy is really changing that, because you can't interfere with the digital economy so easily as you can with the physical economy in a lot of ways. The digital economy is changing a lot of things when it comes to regulation, and really it's making a lot of people who perhaps previously would be for regulation be against it, because we see the impact firsthand. And it's very interesting to see how the digital economy is changing and is actually in favor of local economy. Because now your next door neighbor can be an Uber driver and make more money to help fund a small business or what have you. This is Digital Drive here on Hot News Talk Radio. The high for today is 95. High for tomorrow is 91. There's a 30% chance of rain for today. This is Hot News Talk Radio AM 1240 and hotnewstalkradio.com. Get the TuneIn app and search for Hot News Talk Radio.
This is a mob mode. This is the mob mode. What kind of fool do you think I am? You think I know nothing about
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
News Talk 1240.
It's the Tuesday night